Hey, I am Remy. I am an intern and hello, and a teacher at the Muse Writer Center. So thank you all for joining us today for this special reading and discussion. Very happy you could make it. For those who maybe don't know about the Muse, we're one of the largest literary centers in the country, and we offer creative writing classes of all genres and levels and all ages here at the Muse itself and out in the communities of Hampton Roads. And now, because of our changed world, also digitally, which is great because we can reach more people. If you want to get involved or sign up for one of our classes, we actually just released our summer schedule, and you can find that at the-muse.org. So let's welcome the reason why we're all here, Elizabeth. Elizabeth Heaney has worked as a therapist for over 35 years and is a teacher for graduate counseling programs for over 25 years. And she's worked as counselor for service members and veterans, and she works to bring to light their very often untold stories. She's now practicing in Asheville, North Carolina. Ms. Heaney continues to work with military populations through writing groups and helping out at the Wounded Warrior Project's combat recovery retreats. So she's doing very important work. Since she has started working with military populations, Ms. Heaney has worked to advocate for soldiers and veterans in her own writing by amplifying the immediacy and importance of their stories and experiences. Her memoir, The Honor Was Mine, A Look Inside the Struggles of Military Veterans, captures her insightful and moving encounters and experiences with military populations. We're so lucky to have Elizabeth with us, so let's get started. Thank you all again for joining us.
Sorry. All the details. I was going gangbusters there for a second. I think some of you know this, but I'm going to just talk a little bit about how I got into working with the military and how the book came about. And then I'm going to read a few of the stories from the book so you get a sense of that. And then we'll have time for questions or discussion. So I'm really open to talking about any aspect of it, the work with the veterans, the writing, what's happened since, like all of that kind of thing. So the lead up to it was that I was a therapist in Tucson, Arizona. I had a private practice there for 26 years. And I wanted to make some changes. And part of that was I wanted to move, but I didn't know where I wanted to move to. And a friend of mine mentioned that, she had been working this job where they move you around different military bases. This was when Iraq and Afghanistan were pretty heated. And so I signed up for that work. I thought, well, it'll, give me a chance to see different places. So what would happen was I would be sent to a base where people were either deploying into combat or just coming home from combat. And my job mostly was to work with the service members and their spouses. But there we go. Sorry, I don't know what happened. I don't know how long it's been muted. So I'll just move on. Okay, so thanks. So I would be sent to a base and I would stay there from 1 to 4 months. And there were a couple of things that were very interesting about the structure of that job. So first of all, it was completely off record. The military did not know who I was talking to. And in fact, I used to do briefings for big auditoriums full of folks coming back from Iraq or Afghanistan. And I would tell them, if your commander comes to me and says, hey, is Johnson talking to you? I will lose my job if I answer that question. And so they were very, very rigorous with that wall. I was not to let anybody in command or in the military know who I was talking to or what I was talking about. And in fact, I didn't even keep any notes. It was that sort of underground. So that's really extraordinary in the military. You know, that it's really extraordinary for you to have the chance to go and ask someone for help and it doesn't go in your record. So that was great. That was a very unique part of the program. Another part of the program that was quite unique was that I only did about, I don't know, maybe 40% of the counseling I did in my office. So I could go out and wander around and be in motor pools and dining facilities and the bowling alley and, you know, the little park down the street. So I spent a lot of my days sort of wandering around and, you know, just kind of chatting with people. And as I would chat with them, the conversation slowly would turn into something more substantial. You know, we would start chatting like, oh yeah, it's really hot, blah, blah, blah. And I might say, you know, talk for a while, and then I'd say something like, so did you just get back? You know, and they, yeah. And, how's it going? You know, like we would just start like that, which I thought was a great approach for working with military population. Because if I stayed in my office, I wouldn't have had any work. You know, I had colleagues that did that and their offices were just empty. So I would arrive at a base. It would take me several weeks just to kind of get oriented and frankly, to win people's trust a little bit. And then they would start talking to me. Their stories really, I have to say, touched my heart. It changed my worldview. I think my worldview went from this to this. It was so powerful for me. It was by far the hardest work I had ever done. And at the same time, it was the most meaningful. I said it says in the book, and I had said this to a friend of mine at the time, that I felt like every day I was catching hearts falling through the air. And that was what it felt like. It just felt like I was as busy as I could possibly be catching these folks who were stumbling because of, you know, the burdens they were carrying. Usually PTSD, not always, but frequently PTSD. Let's see, I think, one more piece. I started writing the book when I was working with a battalion who lost a soldier in Afghanistan. And I was still very new at that point, and I honestly thought they would kind of just be tough and soldier on and, you know, and that wasn't what happened at all. I mean, the battalion building, the atmosphere just dropped. And there were all these very hushed conversations. And I was talking to people in stairwells and out where they smoked cigarettes. And, you know, people were just heartbroken that this guy had died. And it moved me so deeply. And it was such a surprise given to, you know, my still pretty civilian mindset, that I went home that day and sat in my hotel room. I stayed at hotels for months at a time and just started writing because my heart was so full of all the conversations I had had that day in the battalion building. And I felt like I needed to sort of offload those moments because I knew the next day was going to be more of the same. And so that kind of became the rhythm. Like every day I was so busy with such intense work. And then I would just, I mean, I wouldn't write anything formal, but I would just sort of like offload. And eventually those stories are what turned into the book. So I think I'll read a few stories and then we'll see. So I wanted the book to be just soldier stories. I didn't want to be in it at all. And I sent it off to an editor and she said, yeah, we can't do it like that. And I said, well, why not? She said, well, there's no through line. We need a through line. So can you follow one of those stories longer? And I said, no, I was there for 1 to 4 months and then I left and we're not allowed to keep in touch with them. So I don't know what happened to any of those people. She said, well, there's only one other through line in the book. And I was like, yeah, what do you mean? She said, well, you. And I was like, oh. So I went back and I rewrote the entire book and I put myself in it as a therapist. You know, I went here, I talked here, I did this, sent it off to her, and she said, yeah, not like that. And I was like, what? And she said the best thing. She said, you know, Elizabeth, if you want this book to change people's hearts, you have to tell them how these stories changed yours. And I thought, oh. Went back, rewrote the book again, and literally would sit at my desk and just think, what stories really changed my heart? And I would just write one after the other of those moments where my heart was changed. So I'm going to read you from the prologue of the book. I've done a little bit of editing just to make it flow a little smoother in a reading, but very minor. All the names, ranks, and physical descriptions, all the identifying stuff has been changed. So these are real stories. Some of them are sort of a conglomerate of a couple of 3 exchanges that I had, but yeah, they're not identified. So this is in the prologue. When it stands as a separate story, it's called I Have to Tell You Something. This guy came into my office. He was actually so distressed that he was escorted to my office. And now in several years of working on military bases, he was the only person that was ever escorted to my office. And the person who escorted him waited just outside my office. And when he finished, he was escorted back to the battalion building. And then the next day he was escorted back to my office like that. So here's how it went. He says, here's how it was. If something moved, I had to shoot. Corporal Springer's face is ashen. All the color drains out as he remembers deploying into Iraq at the beginning when the killing was crazy and out of control. You understand? If it moves, I shoot. I understand, Corporal. If it moves, you shoot. I keep my voice steady and my gaze steady. We were clearing buildings, moving through the worst parts of the city, dangerous neighborhoods. If something moved, I couldn't take the time to figure out what it was. If I hesitated, I'd be dead. I look at him and nod, but I stay quiet, wanting him to keep telling the tales he can't bear to hold inside anymore. He tells me he and his buddies were fighting hard, never knowing who the enemy really was. Someone who looked like an innocent shopkeeper might be carrying a bomb. A young woman leaning against a doorway might be spying on troop movements. This battle-ravaged soldier wrings his hands and runs them back and forth across his buzz-cut blonde hair. He sits on the edge of the worn gray couch, not looking out the window, not glancing around the room. When he's not looking intently at me, he's gazing at the cloud patterns in the linoleum floor. When I went over there, I was 19. I thought I was hot shit, all gung-ho. Let's do this, you know? But when I got there, it wasn't anything at all like what we'd been told in training. His voice trails off and he shudders. My buddies were dropping like flies. I lost count after the first week or so. I thought I would be next, every minute, every single day. And it became so simple. Just keep shooting. Shoot at everything. Shoot first. It was going to be me or them. I felt like a goddamn monster. I still had a whole year left in my deployment, and it was only the end of my first month. His voice drops. Here's the thing, man. Sometimes when the fighting was close up, I saw the guy's face. Just before I pulled the trigger, we would look at each other. I remember their face. I remember them, man. And now I keep wondering, what will God think of me? I know I had to shoot, but I was raised Catholic. Now I don't know if God will even look at me. We finish for that day, and he leaves, and he comes back, I think 1 or 2 days later. This part of the story is when he comes back. Springer scoots up to the very edge of the couch and leans forward intently, his body like a tight coiled spring. Ma'am, I have to tell you something. I nod. When I came back, I was glad to be home and out of that hell over there, but life didn't make sense anymore. I tried to act like I was okay, but I wasn't myself, and everyone knew it. Ma'am, He keeps his eyes on me like he needs ballast for the next part of the story to come forward. Then he blurts out, sometimes I hide in my closet. I can't help it. I know I'm a grown man, but I can't help it. It's okay, I tell him. I know you can't help it. You're just trying not to be so scared. Yeah, he says really softly. His voice is faint as he slips into the image of himself in the closet. I get way back in the corner. Sometimes I pull clothes on top of me. I pull things off hangers and try to cover myself up. It's dark and quiet in there. Right, I say. It's quiet and nothing happens. You're safe for a while, aren't you? He nods and takes in huge gulps of air, tears streaming down his face. But I have to tell you something else. I nod again. One day when I'm in my closet, I hear my dad calling my name. He's walking through the house, calling me and trying to find me. I know it's him. I know it's my dad, but I can't get myself to move. He walks into my room, then starts to leave. But then I hear him walk over to the closet and turn the doorknob. He sticks his head in, and for a long time, we just look at each other. Then my dad gets down on his knees, crawls into the closet, pulls me into his arms, and starts crying. He just holds on to me real tight, and we both cry like babies. Springer breaks down and sobs uncontrollably. I'm glad you have a dad like that, I say quietly. When he looks up, his hard stare has weakened ever so slightly, and his gaze holds a tiny hint of vulnerability that wasn't there before. He's finally beginning the long journey home. Yeah, that's the opening to the book. I always start with that because I feel like it gives you such a clear sense right away of the kind of work that I might do at any given moment. And part of what was different in that work was that rather than, like I said, sitting in an office and people coming in, that kind of exchange could happen anywhere, just after we were just talking about the weather. So that's part of what changed the way I worked, is I had to be ready to kind of slide into that anytime that moment of courage came up for them. I never knew when they were going to find the courage to say what they needed to say. And so I felt like I sort of had to be on 24/7 just to make sure I was ready to receive it. So the next piece that I'm going to read tells you about the first few days that first couple of weeks I was doing this work. So please get the picture that I'd never had any exposure to the military before this. My dad served in World War II. My two brothers were a little bit too young to serve in Vietnam. And, I had one cousin in the Coast Guard, but outside of that, no exposure. So I show up at my first base, kind of ready to go. Here's what happens. In those first days, I misread an insignia and addressed a command sergeant major as first sergeant. I could feel the air bristle with his reaction. Basically, I just insulted him. He was good-natured, but very direct when he said, "Ma'am, it's been a long time since I was a first sergeant." His hard stare and pointed silence made sure I got the distinction. I was on thin ice with that mistake. On another day, during an encounter with a couple of battalion officers, I deferred to one officer only to turn around and realize I should have deferred to the other. And later in that first week, I stood in a reception area waiting to meet with yet another commander. This one was in charge of scheduling briefings I was to give to returning soldiers. So I stood in an open area surrounded by innumerable doors, and I noticed a display of photos of fallen battalion soldiers on the wall right next to me. It made me wonder, am I allowed to stand here? I looked to my right and left, concentrating on the placement of the staff duty desk, the commander's doorway, and the display of photos. I couldn't figure out if there was some indication that I just couldn't read. But shortly after I had the thought, a soldier came up and graciously said, "Ma'am, do you think you might like to wait right over here?" He pointed to an area just a couple of feet away, and I moved. The abbreviations of military speak left me feeling just as lost. One day, just after lunch, I bumped into an earnest young private first class who had a few moments to chat before he had to report for work. We stood in the hallway and he told me he was from a farm up in Nebraska. His enthusiasm for military life was apparent. With his big green eyes, ready smile, and clean-cut appearance, he exuded excitement and eagerness, even as he casually leaned against the wall and rolled his cap in his hands. "Yeah," he told me, "I want to change my MOS so I can PCS out of here." I had no idea what he had just said. He smiled at me. He was waiting for a response. So I scrambled and finally sputtered, "Well, how's that going?" And he says, "Oh, pretty good. My wife wants to go to Aviano, but nobody gets in there. I'll probably switch to a 15N. I think that'll give us the best shot, or maybe Richardson. They've got airborne up there." I smiled, tried to process what he said. Aviano, 15N, Richardson. In the end, I said, "Well, I really hope that works out for you guys. Keep me posted." He smiled and walked off to his afternoon duties. In my hotel room at the end of the day, I dropped onto the bed and looked up the acronyms in my handbook. He wanted to change his job, his MOS, so he could move to a different base, PCS. The handbook contained page upon page of acronyms, and my heart sank as I despaired of ever understanding what they were saying. The small, subtle ways I stumbled were innumerable. When a soldier asked to meet with him, I'd confirmed that we would meet at 6:30. His look of confusion cued me into the fact that if I didn't want to meet with him at 6:30 in the morning, I should have said 18:30. I was usually the only person dressed in civilian clothes in the battalion offices or motor pools, so I was highly visible as I tripped through faux pas after faux pas, willing to learn, but finding the base as confounding as the wilds of Borneo. So the learning curve and by the way, I worked with folks from all different branches of the military. In the book, I'm always using soldiers just for ease's sake, just so, people aren't switching around and having to look up lots of different terms and names and things like that. But yeah, that was the start. It took me months and months to feel like I learned the code. But what happened after that, just a little PS, is that when I went back into private practice and started working with military folks there, I could keep up with those people, and they would say, "Gosh, the people at the VA don't even know all this." So it came in handy eventually. I'm going to read another one. I like this one because, it wasn't all PTSD. This story is about, let's see. So a battalion had been deployed for a year. And on this night, they're coming home. And so all their family members and friends and loved ones are waiting in this big hangar for them to arrive. They're being bused from an airfield nearby. So the buses are going to arrive, and then they're all going to come into this big hangar. So I'm there, sort of meandering through the crowd and chatting with people as we're waiting. This one is called, oh, and one more thing I want to tell you before I read this. The kids don't know what's happening. And that's very typical with this because these schedules of when the plane is going to land or when they're actually going to arrive change again and again and again. They could tell them they're coming on Friday and then they get notice, no, they're not coming till Sunday. They can tell them they're coming at 2 p.m. and then they get a notice it's going to be 3 a.m. So typically families with small children don't tell the kids mom or dad's coming home because it's too hard for them to make that switch. So the kids in this story don't know. Okay, this one's called It's a Party. There's loud music playing and the vast hulking hangar is full of people waiting for soldiers to arrive. The crowd is huddled in twos or threes, closely melded together in their exquisite waiting. Soon, over 200 battle-weary troops will march into the hangar and reunite with families and loved ones they haven't seen for a year. It's close to midnight, but once you've walked into the hangar, the assault of loud music, the people, the bright lights, it feels as if you just arrived at a raucous block party on a summer day. I walk through the crowd and notice a soldier's wife I talked with in recent weeks. Her husband is one of the soldiers scheduled to arrive tonight. I walk over and meet her 3 young daughters, 8, 5, and 1.5. They're all dressed up in matching pink dresses. I walk over and start to chat with them. We talk about how pretty their dresses are, and I admire all the frills. I notice the delicate edges of lace on their little white socks, and they giggle with pleasure. I tease them about being up so late, asking them if I can just lay down on the concrete floor next to them and take a nap. They think I'm silly. We keep chatting, and then I ask, what's going on with all these people in the hangar? The 5-year-old, the most precocious of the 3, dances on her toes and squeals, "It's a party!" It is? Well, why are we having a party? I ask her. Her whole body wiggles as she shouts, "Some soldiers are coming home!" Her sisters watch her wiggling, and the older one rolls her eyes, embarrassed by the sister's effusiveness. "Oh, good," I say. "I love that kind of party. I like it when soldiers come home." The 8-year-old nods. "My friend Caitlin, her dad's coming home." And then their mom joins in. "We're happy for everyone, aren't we, girls?" "Yes," the girls chorus, caught up in the joy. I stay a while longer, then move off to talk with other people. A half hour goes by before the hangar doors start to slide open. The music suddenly changes to the pounding theme from Chariots of Fire, and a cadre of battle-worn soldiers marches in. Standing off to the side, I watch the girls shuffle and bounce as the level of anticipation skyrockets. The girls wave to neighbors and friends. They stomp their feet to the music and hang on to the mom while they watch the soldiers file in and come to a tight formation at the center of the hangar. After a few words from the commander, the soldiers are dismissed and the formation crumbles and dissolves like a sand castle washed apart by the ocean. Soldiers rush in every direction looking for loved ones, and the hangar is filled with happy chaos. The little girls don't see their dad until he's just a couple of feet in front of them. The 8-year-old opens her mouth, then forgets to shut it. She's staring at her dad like he's a ghost, a phantom soldier, her whole body frozen in shock. The 5-year-old screams, "Daddy!" and runs into his arms. At the exact moment, the littlest one starts to cry and breaks into a wobbly little toddler's run. She propels her tiny body straight into her daddy's legs and sticks there like she's plastered to him forever. Their mom hangs back just long enough for the girls to have their moment. Then she runs forward too, and she's crying along with them. In about 2 seconds, they're all clinging to each other, crying and hugging and swaying in each other's arms. Her husband's embrace pulls the whole family in. He's got his head buried in his wife's shoulders, but his hands are constantly making sure his girls are right there too. His love a force field around his beautiful family. I've got another one or two stories to read, but I was thinking we should pause here and just see if we have questions or comments, any response to the stories or to the work in general. I'd be happy to hear about that. And I think Remy's gonna help you know like how to get noticed.
Yes. So just go ahead and wave, raise your hand, and Elizabeth will call on you, and that's your cue to just unmute yourself and ask a question.
Yeah.
I know that there's some people who aren't on video, so feel free to also do that virtually, ask questions in the chat portion, or ask through Facebook if that's easier.
Yeah. Down at the bottom of the screen, there's a little box that says chat. And if you click on that, it'll open up a place where you can type in a question and Remy will see it. So anybody, questions, comments? Yeah, Mary, unmute yourself there.
I think I'm on.
You're unmuted, yeah.
Yeah. I stayed in the military for 30 years. And I know during that time frame, I needed to go talk to someone.
Yeah.
Such a stigma that I never did it. And I'm listening to what you're talking about, that the commanders, nobody knows who knows that that person is interacting with you. And I'm sitting here wishing that during my time, I retired in 2004. During my time, I would have had you in my life, things might have been a little bit different.
Listen, Mary, I totally understand. And I can't tell you how many people I've heard a similar story from that wanted to talk to somebody and truly didn't have an option because it would affect their service. So they didn't have an option. So what happened was the DOD set up this program because they noticed that, you know, people were struggling so much when they came back. And so they created this program where it would be off the record, which I thought was brilliant. And yeah. I'm so sorry you didn't have the option.
Right. But I did the outside option, but not the military.
Yeah.
And then the other thing is I like how you, instead of lying down on a couch or sitting up in a chair face to face across from a table or maybe chairs, the walking around. I think more receptive even to today to meet with someone and just talk.
Yeah.
More would come out, but I'm okay now. But just the idea of thinking back, and then some of the people that worked for me, they were afraid to go, you know, help as well.
Yeah, no, I totally understand. And, you know, I can't tell you how many conversations I might have with someone about their dog or their housemate or their husband or, you know, whatever before. There's one guy in the book that I wrote about and I talked to him so many times. And then one day out of the blue, as I start to walk away, he goes, "You're going to be in your office later?" And I was like, you know, yes, yeah, definitely, you know. And to be between you and me, I had not planned to be in my office later, but I just thought, absolutely, like the moment you asked that question, you got me, you know. But I never knew when that moment was going to happen. And I had some colleagues that really didn't like the work because they just, like I said, they wanted to sit in the office. Mm-hmm. One guy said, well, I feel like a car salesman, like I'm out trying to sell therapy to people. And I thought, oh, no, you got to have a much bigger picture than that. Like, this is such a change that we're even here. Like, it's a privilege to be out walking around trying to talk to people, you know? So thank you. And thank you for 30 years. That's remarkable.
Okay, you're welcome.
Wow. Anybody else? Questions, comments? Yeah, Mike, just unmute yourself there. Oh, sorry, Remy.
Okie dokie, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, good. First of all, Mary, I don't know your branch, but yeah, talk to somebody. I did 3 tours in Vietnam, came home, and all I knew was something was wrong. And yeah, talking to folks really makes a difference.
She
It
has
was Air
talked to
Force.
somebody now.
It
Yeah.
was Air Force.
Excuse me?
She was Air Force.
Oh, you were a wingnut. Okay, I was a squid. All righty, welcome home. Thanks for your service, Air Force. Appreciate it.
And she has talked to somebody.
And you have, good.
Yeah.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
All righty. And you, I have to say about you, Elizabeth, that you are one of maybe 2 civilians, maybe 3 civilians in my life I've ever met who actually gets it. So thanks for that.
Mike.
And thanks for writing the book.
Yeah,
Appreciate
thank you. You know what I realized, Mike, as I got into that world was that I had to let it change me. And I thought that is the piece that I think civilians hesitate. It's like, if you open up to that world and these stories, you're going to be changed. You can't really protect yourself. And, you know, I'm grateful that I was willing to do that, but I do think a lot of civilians, and I don't mean therapists necessarily, I just mean civilians, they're not really willing to let the military stories affect them. They want to kind of keep it at thank you for your service. And so you know, it's like I said, it's a privilege. It's a privilege. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Yeah.
I'm muting myself now.
Okay.
So we have a question from Kelly. This came from Facebook for you. What's the biggest misconception civilians have about soldiers returning from deployment?
Yeah. So the biggest misconception kind of falls into, I'd say the biggest is that they're full of PTSD and going to go crazy at any minute. And the other misconception that's right behind that one is, oh, they'll just come back and drop back into life and everything's fine. No big deal. So those, I mean, that's impossible, right? Because both have truth in them, but neither one of those are the truth. And I feel like, again, as civilians, we got to get how much the story roams between those 2 spots. I have not met a returning combat veteran who had an easy time adjusting to coming back. They may exist out there. It could be because of my work. I just haven't met them, but I've not met a single one. I've been doing this for 10 years. They struggle a little bit or to an extreme degree. You know, I've talked with folks who, one guy just popped into my head who lives out in the middle of nowhere in the mountains of North Carolina, bought a house that's on top of a hill where you can see 360. And, you know, that's the only way he could imagine feeling safe. People really struggle. So yeah, I would bookend those 2 things in terms of misconceptions. And I also feel like it's a tricky thing because civilians are often a little bit hesitant to approach service members or veterans because it does feel like a whole different world. And I hope the book helped civilians have a little bit more courage to just reach across that divide. Thanks, Kelly. Anybody else? Yeah, Shannon, right? Is that right?
Yeah, that's me again.
Okay, great.
I was wondering, oh, thank you, by the way. I was wondering in your talking with returning and veterans, what percentage of the problems are from the military service, and what percentage are have a significant portion of problems that happen before that? Because in my husband's community specifically, and my brother also served, and it seemed like a high portion get into the military in the first place because of things that happened along before. I just was wondering what your thoughts were on that.
Yeah, thanks, Shannon. So, you know, I have a weird sort of lens into that, or filter, because I'm a therapist. So to be perfectly honest with you, I'm always scanning for that anyway, right? With any client. So what I noticed was typically the folks who had the worst PTSD often had some sort of difficulty in childhood, maybe an abusive upbringing, maybe just neglect, maybe just not a really healthy, structured, embracing family life. And that people who had really stable family lives growing up, they might have PTSD, but they could cope with it better. Whereas the folks with not such a great background, really, they, in therapist language, they didn't have any coping skills. I did a lot of work with couples, young couples, and a lot of those couples, they didn't really have any relationship skills. So one of them goes off for a year and comes back. They don't even know how to like talk with each other. They don't get along, and it made me really realize it's like some of that has nothing to do with the military. These are young people that just don't have relationship skills, really, really basic relationship skills. They didn't see them growing up. Nobody treated them in these kinds of ways. And it was something that I was always really aware of. Just to take this a little bit further, I think the military really dropped the ball a lot with people struggling. So I do think some of it was with the military. And of course, with both male and female veterans, a lot of times I was talking about military sexual trauma and, sexual abuse in the military. So both in not getting help, not recognizing difficulties, and also really sort of covering up things, I think the military is responsible for that part. And I think you're tracking something there that sometimes they're coming in with issues that are pretty unresolved that they need help with. All the more reason to have a program like what I was a part of, right?
I agree. I'm gonna mute myself.
Thanks so much. Other questions? Cindy has a question and she's already unmuted. Look at that.
I did. I've been kind of waiting to ask a writing related question here.
Yeah.
You shared your story at the beginning about you wanted this to all be about the soldiers, and then the editor wanted you in. Tell us about that process of inserting yourself into a place you didn't want to be. How did you do it? What was it like for you and all that?
Okay. I'm being completely honest with you. When I had that conversation with the editor and she said, no, you got to put yourself into blah, blah, blah. I was like, well, thank you so much for the chat. And I hung up and I was beside myself. Pissed is not the right word, but I was just like frustrated. I was like, I don't want to be in the goddamn book and I don't want it to be about me and the focus should be on them and blah, blah, blah. And at the same time, there was this little voice in my head that knew she was right. And so I felt like I had to throw a tantrum for a week or so until I could quiet down and be like, okay, fine, I'll write about myself. But I can tell you honestly, it was never easy for me to turn that lens on myself and to write so specifically, some really vulnerable things about the changes that I went through and the things that I had to challenge in myself in order to do the work well. I found it painful. And so if I could keep using that lens of which moments changed my heart, I felt like that lens let me into really beautiful moments as well as little painful moments and complicated moments as well as moments that were full of grace and simplicity. So that's why I said I just was so grateful that she told me that specific remark, because that became sort of the North Star for me. It still wasn't easy, and to take it a little step further, even when the book came out, it was really uncomfortable for me at readings to have people, talking about things that had happened to me I am a somewhat private person, and I just put a book out about myself in such a particular way, particularly two things. One was how difficult my life had become just before I just started working with the military, and people really homed in on that. They really liked knowing about that. I understand, it gave them a good insight into where I was coming from. And the other thing was when I got secondary PTSD from working with so much trauma, you know, just day after day after day, my nervous system just blew out at one point. And therapists call it secondary PTSD because I wasn't in the, you know, the trauma of combat, but I was sort of swimming in the fallout of it to the point where I got PTSD. And writing about that in the book, when I did readings, at every single reading, people homed in on that and wanted to talk about that and wanted to talk about what that was like. And it was really hard for me. I don't mind doing it because I understand it helps them understand the book and it helps them understand the military folks in the book. So I just kind of had to like surrender to the resistance and discomfort in the service of getting the stories out there. If I could think of it that way, I could tolerate it, but I would not mind never writing another memoir about myself at all. I would not mind that. I'll even write more nonfiction, but not that. Oh, you guys are going to come back in a few years and say, yeah, this new book, I thought you said. But yeah, thanks for the question. Yeah. And Mike, go ahead, unmute yourself there. Unmute, yeah.
I am unmuted. Okay, I got a couple of questions for you. Let's see. First, are you going to have any more courses through the VA?
We're not going to do more courses through the VA, although we are going to do courses through the North Carolina Veterans Writing Alliance. So they're not affiliated with the VA anymore, but we are. So I used to help in the writing groups that were affiliated with the VA. There were some Vietnam veterans in that group that got so much out of it that they stepped out, formed a nonprofit, raised funds, and are now running the North Carolina Veterans Writing Alliance because they wanted their younger brothers and sisters to have access to these writing groups. I'm so moved. That's the kind of people I get to work with, right? They got so much out of it. Yeah, and Mike was in that group. They got so much out of it, they formed a damn nonprofit, raised funds, and are now rolling out their own program. Yes. So those guys will be doing more groups. We were going to start more groups in June, and now we're looking at waiting till September. So we'll see. But it's going to happen.
Mary, I hope you're listening to her about this because she was really good when I went through it. Now,
thanks, Mike.
Number two. Second question. I've been writing for a long time, trying to get it said, writing lots of stories, read some of them to you, wrote new stuff. And I'm sitting here thinking, what the heck do we do with it?
Yeah.
I'd kind of like, I mean, you know, I've done those public readings and stuff like that, but I'd really like to get it out there so people can know and understand. Mm-hmm. You know, you do everything you talk about, I have a story for.
I bet.
Yeah. And I really want to get it out there. I have absolutely no inclination to like sell myself or publicize myself or get some internet presence on uBook or FaceTube or FacePlant or anything like that. I just, you know, I would just think it'd be really good if I could stick something together and like put it out there somehow.
You know, one of the things you could do, Mike, is just Google military journals or published military stories or something like that. There are so many journals specifically devoted to publishing veterans writing, and they're fantastic. And some of them are online, some of them are in print. But you could just take a story or two and just like sort of test drive them. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Many of these stories were published other places first because I wanted to do the same thing. The other thing I would suggest, if you really are serious about trying to get it published, is you got to have readers read through it and help you shape it up. It's got to be really tight before you take it to any kind of agent or editor or something like that. So step one would be see if you can fly some of those individual stories, which I think there's a good chance of that. And I can help you look up some of those journals if you want. And step 2, get several what we call first readers to look at what you've written and really sort of hone it and shape it and tighten it. And then, I mean, after I had first readers look at it, I actually then took it to an editor before I even approached an agent. So.
Cool. Okay.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Shannon has a question.
I'm not so much a question, just hi, Mike. I'm Sela. We are on Scribophile together, and his work is pretty tight already, actually.
Yeah.
But I don't know if you're interested in self-publishing at all. It's not for everybody, but if you want to run your I can format your stuff if you want to go in that direction. I can walk you through the process. My brother publishes his military action. We're on book 6 now, so we got the situation pretty well covered. I don't know about the marketing, that's its own thing, but I can get it right in type for you. Anyway.
Oh, Shannon.
Yeah.
Wow. Gold medal.
Shannon, you're on Scribophile.
Yeah, I'm Sela. You gave me the link to this.
Oh,
yeah, thank
okay.
you, by the
Cool.
way.
Oh, all right. I'm glad you got here. I'm going to mute me again.
Okay.
Yeah, so Mike's in charge of the veterans group at Scribophile, so
Gotcha.
I've read some of his stuff.
Thanks for the mention of self-publishing. I dropped that out because I didn't go that route, but I think it's a perfectly valid route and one that people should think about for sure. Thank you very much. Yeah. Other questions or comments? Just checking. Yeah. Yeah, go ahead. Sierra, unmute yourself.
So, I was wondering, did you always write, or did your experiences working with veterans and military populations prompt you to get into it?
Here's what's funny, just between you and me. I actually used to write as a little kid, and I wanted to publish it in, what was that magazine? It was like a kid's magazine. It was really big. I can't think of the name of it right now. Kind of a pastel colored front on it. Anyway, I'll think of it in a minute. But I used to write it, like print out these stories I made up longhand, like on notebook paper. Mm-hmm. And I would get my mom to send them off to this little kid's magazine. Of course, nothing ever happened with them. But so, and then I didn't write for like, oh gosh, let's say 20 years. Mm-hmm. I mean, maybe sometimes I kept a journal or something, but it was not a part of my focus. And then somewhere along the line, when I was living in Tucson, I ended a relationship, and I was, down in the dumps looking for something to do. And I saw this little blurb in the weekly paper, those weekly papers that come out in communities. And it said, there was a workshop for writing your spiritual autobiography. And I thought, oh, sounds interesting. So I go to the workshop, and, she puts us through some prompts, and we do some writing, kind of like we did this morning. And I had to leave a little bit early. So I went up to her and said, well, I need to leave. Thank you so much. And she said, can I walk you out to your car? And I said, sure. And she said to me, you should do something with your writing. And I was like, I said, what would I do? I mean, it was not in my consciousness at all. I was just doing, She said, well, you could take writing classes, you could be in a writing group, you could, and she stayed in touch with me, and I ended up joining her writing group and was in it for maybe 6 or 8 years. And that was mostly nonfiction, just writing off of prompts. And then I wanted to go to a writing conference. And in order to get into the conference, it was pretty competitive. You had to submit 20, 25 pages. Okay, at that point, I had maybe written 3 pages max. Mm-hmm. So I sit down and I write what I think is a short story, right? And it's 20 pages, and I turn it in and I get in. And I think, okay, great. So I go to the conference, and everybody in the room has published something. And I'm thinking, and a lot of them were in MFA programs, so they had written a book as their MFA program, right? Yeah. And I'm thinking, I thought I was gangbusters for 20 pages. I thought it was hot stuff, you know what I mean? And I felt so, just out of place, to be frank. I thought, oh, I'm in way over my head here. And yet the feedback in the group when they workshop my piece, what about this character? And what happened here? And what about, and the teacher turned to me and she said, do you understand this is not a short story? Do you understand this is a novel? And I was like, what? So that's how I got into it, or back into writing, from when I was a kid. So somewhere in me, I was interested in it as a kid, and then sort of stumbled back into it when I think I was in my earlier mid-30s. And then I've been writing ever since. So yeah, that's the story.
Thank
I
you.
started the novel, that bit that I had at the workshop. I went home and I started opening it up and turning it into a novel.
Yeah.
And then I took the job with the military, partly because it would give me time to write, because in between each assignment, I would have 4 to 6 weeks off and I could just write every day. And I did, until I got to the second or third assignment. And then I thought, I got to set that aside and write this. The stories were just too powerful. So I am now headed back to that novel. I still have it. It's still very interesting to me. And we'll see what happens with that.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Anybody else? I see a chat message here. No? Let's see. Oh yeah, absolutely. Children's highlights. Yes, yes, Mike, that's the one. Highlights magazine was the children's magazine. Great big print. I wanted to get in that thing. I made up ridiculous stories. I wonder if you might like to hear another story. Oh, I see some heads nods. That's great. Let's see. I'm going to read one about a spouse, because I liked working with the spouses as well. Sometimes I was at a base and worked quite a bit with spouses. This one particular base, the battalion was deployed and then they were coming back. And so I was there for about 6 weeks before they came back. So most of that 6 weeks I was working with either folks that didn't deploy or the spouses. This story is called If a Pillar Falls. Deborah and I sit on a bench overlooking the pond on the far side of the base. Although it's too chilly to be sitting outside, it's clear Deborah would rather talk to me where there's little chance of being seen by others. She begins by talking about her 10 and 11-year-old daughters who started having problems in school during her husband's 5th year-long deployment. As we discuss the girls, I wait for what I know Deborah is actually wanting to talk about, how difficult all those deployments were for her. Sure enough, Deborah tightens and smooths the ponytail on the back of her head and starts to talk about herself. The last deployment was the worst. There were so many casualties in David's command, I literally couldn't even keep track of them all. It seemed like there was bad news every single day. She pauses for a long time, and I watch her face change from a look of tight concern to a raw vulnerability that surprises me. Her voice is barely a whisper when she speaks again. I've been to 93 memorial services. That last sentence hangs between us. We both stare at the pond and feel our way through an immense silence as the reality of 93 memorial services ricochets through both our hearts. I know she's just walked out on a thin sheet of ice that covers deep, dark waters. She finally glances over at me. It was absolutely terrible. I knew I had to stay strong no matter what. You know how it is. I'm the commander's wife. All these casualties are piling up, and everyone, especially the soldiers' wives, they're looking at me to see if we're going to be all right. I'm sitting there at the memorial services in chapel after chapel with the widows, some of them only 19 or 20. I'm hugging the parents who just lost their child. I'm sitting in pews just across the aisle from soldiers whose friend isn't coming back. I felt like a nurse who couldn't stop the bleeding. Sometimes I went to 2 services a day. It was, and here Deborah falters, crushing. She continues without even looking at me. When things are so bad, it can feel like the entire outfit is sliding into chaos. I couldn't let that happen. You see, it's like having a big structure with a pillar on each corner holding up the whole place. If a pillar falls, the whole thing is coming down. I just wanted to make sure they didn't see a pillar start to fall. Deborah can hardly get her breath now. This is the very spot where she's been making sure not to feel things for years. I'm so sorry, I say quietly. She nods a little. She's looking at her hands, tightly clasped in her lap. I can't even go into a church anymore. I try to step inside, but I just can't. We sit in silence for another 10 minutes or so. Eventually, she reaches over and squeezes my hand. Thank you so much. I just needed to say all that. Deborah stands up, pulls the collar of her coat tight around her neck, straightening and smoothing it into place as she walks away. As a little side story, after the book came out, that particular person got back in touch with me. And the story has changed quite dramatically, but just that it was a commander's wife who'd been to a lot of memorial services was enough that she could relate to it. So she got in touch with me and she said, I've now been to over 110. And I thought, gosh, I sent that story along with some others to each of the Joint Chiefs of Staff before the book came out. I was just letting them know that I'd done this writing about combat veterans. And so I sent it off and I got a letter back, a handwritten note from one of the Joint Chiefs of Staff who said, thank you so much for that story about the wife. My wife has been to over 500 memorial services. Yeah. And just a little bit about the stories being anonymous. You know, that first story I read about the guy that hides in his closet, I was a little nervous that might be too recognizable, although it fits for several people I talked to. And I read it at a reading that was taking place near a military base. And at the end of the reading, 3 separate spouses came up separately and said that they could relate to that story, that their husband either hid in the closet or in the shower or under the bed or, you know, something. And I thought, I'm so glad I put that story in there. It was one that I really was unsure about because it just felt too, I don't know, too intense or, you know, too specific, but I'm really glad I put it in there. So. Any other thoughts or questions? Cindy, go ahead and unmute yourself. What you got?
On that same line of thought, how did you make the decision about which stories to include and which not to include? Because I'm sure there's a million of them. So what were your criteria?
My criteria were the ones that hit me the most, and they're not all sort of tragic stories. There's some very funny stories in the book too. I could read one of those in a minute if you want, but you know, I just thought, what stories really remain in my heart? And you're right, I have a file with a lot more in them, but these were ones that I wanted to choose stories that told sort of the whole breadth of the work with the combat veterans. So everything from the spouses to the little kids, to leaving, to coming home, to the boredom, to going on trainings, to I just tried to pick stories from all kinds of facets of military experience. I wrote the book for 2 reasons. One is I wanted civilians to understand the military better. I was passionate about that because it made such a difference to me to understand them better. But the second thing is I wanted anybody related to the military to be able to read the book and get the feeling of being understood and seen. So the book was my message to the military, like, I see you, I hear you. And so I tried to pick stories that were, that would speak to a lot of people, but that also were very nuanced in terms of the military experience, so that it would speak very directly to folks that had been in the military. Almost like folks in the military could read another layer of the story, and folks in civilian life could be touched by a different part. That was sort of how I thought of it. Yeah. Thanks. I'm going to pull the book out. All these other things have been on pages, but I'm going to pull the book out because there is this funny story I want to read you guys. I have to use my glasses for this one. It'll take me just a second to find it. Here it is. This one is called You Wanted to See Me? Sergeant First Class Turner is one tough son of a gun. He's a big, gregarious guy who can often be heard telling his newest joke. But he's all business when it comes to battalion work, focused, sharp, and infinitely attentive to detail. He's glad I'm there to counsel and support his soldiers, but he's the kind of soldier that would never, ever consider coming to counseling himself. He wears his role and his rank with great pride and sees himself as someone who can handle just about anything, because that's what soldiers do. But lately, I've watched him spend weeks and weeks navigating endless planning details, chained to his desk day after day. He's in charge of logistics for several hundred soldiers returning from Afghanistan, sorting out transportation, housing, job assignments, and communication. Every time he gets things set up, the schedule changes, and he has to start all over again. He's looking stressed and serious. His typical jokes and smiles have disappeared, and it's clear he's lost his usual balanced outlook. If he speaks at all, it's down to 1 or 2 word exchanges. So I decide I should come up with a way to lower his stress level. The next morning, I walk into his office, take a seat in the chair right next to his desk, and wait for his attention. He's absorbed at his computer, so it's a few minutes before he looks up. Yes? He's busy and just wants to know, what do I need from him? Morning, Sergeant. You wanted to see me? What? I understand you wanted to talk to me. Me? I want to talk to you? Not me. He starts to sputter. He looks around to see if anybody's overheard. Well, Sergeant, I'm just saying, I heard that you really needed to talk. I just wanted to stop by so you could tell me what's on your mind. He gets more and more flustered, pushes his chair back and turns it at an angle as if to get as far as possible from someone who might want him to share his feelings. His face is registering disbelief, and I can almost see his mind racing. Before he can say anything more, I talk to him in a soothing therapist voice. It's okay, Sarge. You can talk to me. Just let yourself say what's on your mind. Whatever's bothering you, you'll feel better. Now there are a few soldiers standing at Turner's doorway, listening to the exchange and starting to chuckle at his discomfort. You got something wrong here, ma'am. It ain't me, no way. I'm telling you, I'm good, I promise. I don't need to talk. I keep a straight face. Well, you know, I was surprised myself, but word got back to me you were hoping I'd stop by and you just didn't know how to reach out. I understand it's hard to reach out when you're struggling. And I just figured I'd make it easy. We can talk right here if you'd like. The poor guy is nearly panicked. He looks at the soldiers standing in the doorway. Monteith, did you set this up? Baker. They're grinning like crazy. No, sir. Well, no way. It wasn't me. He looks back at me. Ma'am, I promise you I'm good. I'm real good. Old Sarge is just fine. Don't need to be talking to a therapist. Honest. Finally, I start smiling at him. I know, Sergeant. You've just been looking so stressed. I figured I needed to punk you a little bit. He breaks into a wide, sheepish grin. Oh, goddamn, there for a minute. I thought you were going to make me do some counseling or something. He starts laughing and shrugs his shoulders as if to reset himself after the frightening notion of a counseling session. He looks at me and growls, "Now get the hell out of my damn office." But he's smiling and he gives me a fist bump as I leave. So that's the extent to which I would do just about anything to get through to these guys. So if I need to punk the first sergeant, I'm on it. So I try to mix things like that in, not only in the stories, but also in my days, because, you know, the heavy stuff was heavy. So let's do some of that. Let's just pause, see if there's any questions or comments from anybody. Again, you can make comments as well. It doesn't have to be a question. Just anything these stories make you think about, or anything it brings to mind. Mike, go ahead.
Okay, I just wanted to say, you know, I immediately identified your sergeant as an S4, and well, right? Logistics, supply, all that.
No comments.
Well, okay. The thing about that is that I've had so many people talk to me over the years, military types, who say, you know, gosh, I never went. I never got deployed. And they say it almost as if it's a terrible regret, because they're talking to somebody who did 3 tours or whatever, and it's like it's a lack that they feel that they didn't contribute.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, like that guy, he's dealing with the logistics of bringing an entire battalion home. Mostly what I tell those folks over the years is, look, if there hadn't been somebody there to ship 50 cal rounds to us, I'd be dead.
Mm-hmm.
And I want, you know, anybody feels like they identify themselves as a REMF, don't. Mm-hmm. Because people in the rear echelon support the people who are in the stuff, and that's important.
I totally agree.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that.
Thank you so much. One of the things that happened, Mike, was because I was working with folks around the wars in Afghanistan and Iraq, people were deploying many, many, many times. So if they were rear D one time, they were usually deployed the next, or they had come back the 2 years before or something like that. So it was a little bit different. It seemed to me that everybody got their turn at some point. And some people, I talked with some people who had deployed, I don't know, I think the 11 or 12 times was the most that and of course I sometimes was talking with special forces who were doing shorter deployments, but very rapidly again and again and again.
The number of deployments just shocked me. I mean, my 3 tours with Navy, that was unusual.
It is, yeah.
3 tours was about the max in Vietnam. And seeing these folks do like 10 and 11 deployments, it's just, man, that's got to tear them up.
Yeah, I had, you'll recognize this story from the book. I had a guy come and talk to me. This was pretty early on. And this is a guy, I dropped the ball with this guy. I'll just say that was why I put it in the book. It was a good example of me just not getting it yet. So this guy, he's at Special Forces. He comes in, I'm in a little building way off on the side of the base. And it's weird because his unit is nowhere near there, but I realized later he's coming there like, because he doesn't want anybody to see him. But anyway, he comes in and he says that they had brought them back from Iraq and they had told them, you were going to keep you home for, I think, at least a year because they had several deployments. So he'd been home just a couple of months, and the commander comes in and says, well, we got to send you back to his whole unit. And he was beside himself. He said, I don't feel like I can handle it. My family is falling apart. My daughter doesn't even know me. My wife and I are polite strangers. And in another few weeks, I'm gone again. And he just, I mean, the hopelessness and the despair in his voice and in his face was unbelievable. Now, keep in mind at that point, I mean, this was maybe just a few weeks into this work for me. And so I started talking to him about, you know, how to manage the stress and, you know, exercise and this and that and the other thing. And he was very polite and shook my hand when he left, and he never came back. And I realized that I had, as a therapist, I had not been willing to let myself sit in his despair. You know what I mean? Like, I had not been willing to sit in his hopelessness with him. So when he talked with me about it, I jumped into trying to give him ideas to kind of fix it. Let's make it better, blah, blah, blah. And that was not what that guy needed at all. I mean, he was one of the people that I needed to maybe do a much longer session with him. Maybe we needed to talk for a few hours, which we could have done. I had the freedom to do that. And just really let him like unload all of that. So I, you know, for the rest of my time working with the military, I wish I could cross paths with that guy again and apologize to him, because I really let him down. That's the only thing. You know, you can imagine how much it took for him to come and talk to somebody. And I just didn't have the skills at that point. That's the honest truth. You know, 6 months later, I would have responded very, very differently, but I just didn't know. Well,
nobody knew what PTSD was when I came out. And all I knew was my first tour, I was ready. You know, I'm ready, willing, and able. My second tour, I had to go back because nobody else of the new guys knew how to do things, and they'd get themselves killed. And then my third tour, I was real close to catatonic.
Yeah.
And, you know, the fact that you didn't know about that, nobody understood anything about it. You know, it was soldier's heart or shell shock or combat fatigue, but nobody recognized it as something that carried forward into your life after the war.
That's really true, Michael.
Yeah.
That's really true.
You've done good. Don't kick yourself for those.
Oh, I'm just acknowledging that I just didn't know. I don't feel like I'm a terrible person or anything, but I don't even feel like I'm a terrible therapist, but I just didn't know. And here's the upside to the story. That taught me a lesson. That taught me a great, but again, I had to let my heart break a little bit with that, you know?
Yeah.
I had to let my heart break that I had dropped the ball when he really needed someone to be there for him. But it taught me, and I can promise you that never happened again. And especially when I came back and started, I left that work because I got tired of bouncing around everywhere, and came back and I started working with combat veterans in my private practice. And I tell you, I'll sit with those guys for effing ever. You know what I mean? Like, we'll go down into it because they've never had anybody be willing to do that. And I can't believe the transformation that I see. It's almost like watching them retrieve themselves. You know what I mean? If I have the stamina to let them go down into that dark cave of PTSD, and I help them walk back out, and we do that as many times as they need to, it is astonishing to me how much I see healing happen. And it's not even like I say things and do things. It's literally just letting them reckon with it, you know?
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Just like, I mean, they'll tell me the most horrific moments. Oh my gosh. I mean, moments I sincerely wish I never had to hear. I don't even want it in my consciousness, but that's fine. I'm willing to hear it because they need to offload it, you know? And so it's incredible to watch that happen. I've had guys come in, one guy comes in, and every time he tried to talk about a particular night in the desert in Iraq, he would start stuttering so bad he couldn't talk. Now, the rest of the time, he never stuttered at all. None. He'd never been a stutterer. But if he ever tried to talk about that night, he would just start stuttering and stuttering. We worked together for a couple of years. And, you know, by the time I stopped working with him, he's laughing and talking, and he'd talk about that night. He'll tell you all about it and how much it hurt and what happened. And, you know, it really gives me a lot of heart sort of sustainment to absolutely know, no matter how bad it is, we can get you out of there.
Yay for you.
Yeah, thanks, Mike.
I'm going to mute me.
Okay. We have just about 10 minutes left. So again, happy to take any comments as well as questions. Yeah, thank you. Anybody? Just checking, I'm scanning here. You Muse folks don't have to hold back. You can jump in here too. Just saying. Yeah.
Have you spoken with any civilians, or have civilians come up to you and shared with you how hearing or reading these stories have maybe shifted their own perspective when it comes to what it takes to be a member of our military?
Some of my most favorite responses have come from civilians that tell me it changed their perspective. Maybe not on the military, but definitely on veterans. So what happened was that, and I'll tell you, this is not bragging, but it's sincere. If you go on Amazon and look at the reviews of the book, there's some beautiful, beautiful reviews on there from civilians who said, I never knew. There's even a couple of reviews on there from people who said, I was really anti-military until I read this book. And I'm telling you, that is pure gold to me. Those are the people, that is fantastic. So, because I think people don't often make that distinction between the military and the veterans or the service members, right? So, or politics or war and service members and veterans. So I hope that the book helps them understand those are completely different things. Like, you can be anti-war and totally pro-veteran. That's a possibility. I'll go with you on that, you know? So that actually is, so when I was working on the book and it was getting ready to come out, and I did a reading at a writer's residency that I was at, and it's just an evening reading with other writers. And I got done, and one of the other folks came up to me afterward and she goes, I can't believe you're writing that book. I said, well, tell me about that. And she said, I've done anti-war work all my life, and I can't believe you're working for the military. And I said, well, wait a minute. So I'm not working for the military. She goes, well, you are, they're paying your paycheck. And I said, well, I'm actually working for the people who are hurting. And that's all I really care about. I don't have that viewpoint that I'm working for the military. And she and I actually ended up having a great conversation. And I really just wanted her to understand, you can be anti-war. That's totally cool. Go for it. Like, protest or, you know, be anti-military. That's fine. But we have veterans, until we stop all wars, we have veterans that need help. That's my entire point right there. And I want all of us to be more dedicated to helping them. That's all. Yeah. Thanks for the question. Mike, got your hand up? Yeah? You got to unmute yourself there.
I couldn't find my cursor. Okay. Remy, is it?
Remy.
Remy. Yeah. Okay, Remy. I just wanted to tell you, part of the North Carolina Writers Alliance, the Veterans Writers Alliance, we do public readings, and I was thinking about some of the civilian reactions we get. I remember reading a piece about my first ever visit to the wall in DC, and a guy came up to me after I read that and he was in tears.
Yeah.
And he said, I got to tell you about my brother, because he just can't, I looked at you and you standing up there in front of people reading, and I realized that I was looking at a version of my brother. And it really does make a huge difference to be able to, for veterans to be able to express it. But if you can say it clearly and make it beautiful, no matter what, you can reach out to people who have never been in the military and that's, that's my purpose. I've talked before about trying to get it said. That's what I've been doing for years. And the civilian response to it is the important part. That's who I need to say it to. So anyway.
Actually, these guys that Mike is part of, the North Carolina Veterans Writing Alliance, and they do public readings, they get standing ovations at every single reading that they do. Oh, the audience goes wild. And then they just descend upon them after the reading with questions and comments and wanting to make contact with them. Yeah. Thanks, Mike.
You're welcome, and I'm glad I could get that plug in for the Writing Alliance. But civilian contact is there. There are stories that you bring home with you, like Elizabeth has talked about. You can't tell those stories. You can't tell. You look in a civilian's eyes and tell them a straight story about something that happened, and you see them go blank. So being able to communicate what happened, I mean, that's people like Kurt Vonnegut and Ernest Hemingway and Salinger, J.D. Salinger, all those folks brought their experiences home from World War II and tried to express it.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, Hemingway came from the Spanish War, but still, same thing.
Thanks, Mike. Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much.
Okay, I'll shut up now.
Cindy, I know you've got your hand up. We got just a few minutes left. Jump in here.
It's been a few years since you published this book. Any thoughts in hindsight? Any feelings about it? Things you would do differently? Reactions that you have now to it? Or
no, I have a slight reaction that I would take out about probably 15% of the words. I just see places where I, sort of hammered it home too much. But that to me is very slight, and I would think that's always going to happen. I just add one more sentence when I really could have left that off, and the point is clear. But other than that, no, I'm proud of it, and no.
And what's been the impact on you personally, having published it and now reading it around the country and that kind of thing?
Well, that's the interesting thing, because when I started, I was in Tucson with my little private practice, teaching in grad programs. Like, I was fine. I did not see this coming. And so literally 10 years ago, today, I hadn't been on a base yet, 10 years ago. And so in 10 years, my life feels like it just took this huge turn. And it opened up not only working with veterans, which I still do to this day, it opened up working with Wounded Warrior Project retreats. It opened up working with veterans writing groups. It opened up speaking at conferences and, giving workshops and things like that, both on writing, with counseling. I do talks at conferences for counselors on how to work with the military. It opened up this whole realm of my work life that I never saw it coming. 10 years ago, if you had said, oh, you're probably going to end up working with the military, I'd be like, get out of here. It's sort of astonishing to me, and I still can't really understand how it happened, but I'm very, very grateful. Yeah, it's been a phenomenal thing. Truly some of the most fulfilling work I've ever done in you know, like I said, over 35 years now. Very grateful. The book opened all that up for me. Thanks. Sean, you want to jump in here before we sign off? I'm just checking.
Remy's going to handle it.
Okay, great. Sorry. I
But
saw you
thank you
pop.
for coming.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you all for joining us. We're obviously so grateful to have Elizabeth. Round of applause. Thank you so much for taking the time. This was really great. And thank you to all of you.